It's that he's somehow able to convey that he loves them, that just by this look, and he holds them. And then I'm going to draw a triangle, because whenever you talk about mimetic theory, you talk in triangles because of this imitative nature of desire, right? So I want to see if we can use Matilda. So here's Matilda. And here's Dudley. So when Matilda gazes towards Dudley to see, remember our triangles, to see what's Dudley looking at, where are his desires focused? What does she see that Dudley desires? Matilda. So she, imitating his desire for herself, feels loving and accepting of her own self. Because that's what Dudley is giving her. This is what we're calling divine love. It's also parental love, what parents do for their children. The child looks to the parent to get reflected love for the child, so that the child can learn to love him or herself. This is how we learn to love ourselves. Okay? And it's never perfect. Because none of us has met Dudley in the flesh. But in the flesh, we've met people who, to a greater or lesser degree, do that for us. Let's talk about, just to clarify, go over the plot points with what is going on with the bishop. Before he was bishop, he was pastor of St. Timothy's. And according to Julia and the professor as well, what was he like then?
Connected with his congregants and everything. I mean, he was engaging and friendly and open.
He was more like Dudley.
Yes, yeah, he
Right.
did. He sounds a lot more like Dudley, yeah. He seemed to be a very gifted pastor, caring and involved in the community. And then what happens? He becomes...
Self-focused.
Yeah, because he becomes the favorite of Mrs. Hamilton, right? And she recommends him, promotes him, right, to be bishop. So what I want to do is sort of draw this relationship between the bishop and Mrs. Hamilton. So we have, I'm going to call him the old bishop, before he's the bishop, when he's at St. Timothy's. Okay? And in this time in his life, he is a lot like Dudley. His model for his behavior is some sort of representation of divine love. I mean, he's a pastor, so, you know, he studies scripture. Christ is a model for him. Who knows? I mean, it's not really clear to us who embodied this for him, but this some model of divine love is present for him. And we're going to shorthand here. And the divine's concern for the needy, for people in general, is imitated by the bishop, right? So that's sort of the bishop triangle there. But he meets Mrs. Hamilton. And what's Mrs. Hamilton like? By the bishop's description and her own description later in the movie.
Materialistic.
She's materialistic, she says. So she's concerned with security with money. She's afraid of poverty, right? That's how she describes herself. So Mrs. Hamilton's model, and we don't know, it's some, I'm sort of calling it a culture of materialism, which could be embodied by, well, we live in a culture of materialism, so you see images and models of that all around us. And this is leading her to a desire for the cathedral, right? An ostentatious display of wealth, or, you know. So right now, she's fixated on this. And then this person meets this person. Okay? And what goes on there? What's going on?
He decides he needs to satisfy her need for the cathedral.
Right. He sees her looking at him as an up-and-coming young star. And she arranges for him to be promoted. So in this, you know, I know who I am by looking at how you're seeing me scenario, he is being influenced by her view of him. And perhaps being persuaded away from this model towards her as a model, right? Now why is she, you know, she is very coercive and co-optive of him in the movie. And she tells us later on what's going on and why that's so important to her, that he approved of this. What happened? Who was her true love? Was it her husband?
No.
Who was it?
Alan,
Yeah, and who was Alan?
musician, composer, who was poor and loved her.
And she loved him. She said, he's the only man I ever loved. And she confesses that she never loved her husband. Yet, she wants to build this monument to her husband. What's that about?
Guilt.
Yeah. Guilt, big time. Because she gave up love for money. She made the trade. And in order to continue to feel good about that trade, she does a lot of maneuvering. She builds monuments to her husband. She's insisting on this cathedral as a monument. She needs everyone to agree with her that this cathedral and this monument are more important than any other value you might have brought to the table. So in order for her to maintain her equilibrium and her denial of the truth about what she did, she needs to co-opt the bishop. You see, so they're in a rivalrous relationship right now because each is trying to get something from the other one, right? So the bishop wants to get and keep his position, the prestige, the honor that he seems to be enjoying in his new position in the community, and she needs to get his approval, right? She doesn't need him to build her cathedral, but she needs him in order to feel good about building the cathedral. You see? So they are...
She's also seeking divine love, I think.
yeah, absolutely.
So that's why she needs him.
Yeah. In the end, obviously, we see. We're all seeking it, right? But here, what's interesting is she doesn't think she needs it. She doesn't think that's what she's seeking. She's in denial of it. And that's why that scene with Dudley is so beautiful, is that he gets her to admit what she needs, that she is in error, that she needs to forgive herself for what she did to Alan and the life that, and the relationship she had with her husband. I mean, there's so much she needs to forgive herself for. And she can do that in the presence of Dudley, who loves her unconditionally. That's what divine love makes possible. It's great. In what I love about this movie is it really embodies it. In theory, there's a lot of Christian doctrine about that forgiveness isn't possible without being in the presence of love, that it is God who forgives us and offers it to us, and we just accept it. And that's our role. And that's what Mrs. Hamilton does in the presence of Dudley. So, and let's look at the bishop, because he is not acknowledging what he needs either, right? In fact, Dudley says earlier in the movie, it's going to be hard for me to help you if you don't know what you want.
He says, but I want a cathedral.
That's what he says at the end. He says, I prayed for a cathedral, and Dudley says, no, you didn't. You prayed for guidance. Which is why that was such a good prayer. It was an admission of what he needed, of what he didn't know, of what he was unsure of. And at the end, when he prays, he says he's praying to get rid of Dudley, and Dudley says, that wasn't a prayer. Because that wasn't a prayer, that was a closed down, I know what I need and I'm going to tell you, and it's a coercive thing. It's trying to coerce God. Where the first prayer was completely vulnerable, completely, I don't know what the heck to do. Help me. And he also, of course, the bishop thinks that, see now, God bless this poor little bishop, his desires are getting off track here. They're heading over here. And he thinks that God is sending him that way. When who is sending him in that direction? It's Mrs. Hamilton. But he won't admit it. He doesn't see it, can't acknowledge it, won't admit it. The same way Mrs. Hamilton is denying the origin of her desire for the cathedral, which is in her own guilt. So the problem, again, as we see, often it's not with this triangular nature of desire, but in the denial of it. And the refusal to acknowledge that we're being influenced by all these things, and maybe we need to evaluate that maybe that's not the supreme model we should be going for. Maybe this is the better model. But this one is bearing down on Mrs. Hamilton and all of us all the time. So it's very hard to resist, because this, if...
Well, our culture tells us that materialism is good.
Is the ultimate good, absolutely. And we get that message in so many ways. I mean, if this is a bowling ball over here, this is a pea. In terms of what models are being offered, what examples, what images, and so forth. So it's hard to believe in something you can't see, and that is not being. It's hard to do something that's not being modeled for you. It's impossible, because humans need models. We're imitative, right? And that's really what the doctrine of the Incarnation is about. Of course, this is why this is such a great Christmas movie, because the Incarnation is about the divine made visible, made flesh, so that we can see what it looks like and have a model to imitate. It's why Dudley is present, so they can see him and they can interact with him, because that's what humans need. We need that flesh and blood interaction. It's how we learn and become. So how does Dudley helped the bishop's marriage. I thought it was such a great touch. Again, another one of these little touches. Dudley's wearing this scarf that Matilda gave the bishop. And the bishop sees it a couple times. He kind of looks at it. And it's clear that Dudley is being the bishop. He's doing the things the bishop should be doing. Especially in relationship to Julia. So, I mean, Dudley's the master of mimesis. So, here's the bishop who's ignoring his wife. Bishop looks, hey Dudley, what's going on? He sees Dudley paying attention to Julia. And this revives the bishop's feelings. Classic love triangle, right? Bishop's feelings are sagging. Dudley is showing interest in Julia, and it gets him excited. I mean, this works in real life. It's plots in movies all the time. People say, you know, he won't propose to you, pretend you're engaged to someone else. Watch how fast he proposes. Because it's all through Shakespeare, of course. Shakespeare is a great documenter of the mimetic triangle. But so Dudley does this, and it works to a T. The bishop begins to feel jealous, and by the end of the movie says, beginning of the movie, the cathedral was the most important thing. By the end of the movie, it's Julia. And it's because of this. Because of the intervention of the angel. But what happens to Dudley?
He disappears, which takes.
Well,
He falls in love with
before he disappears,
Right.
he
Okay.
falls in love with Julia. Now, why does that happen? Why does that happen? As the bishop's feelings for Julia are growing, Dudley is watching that. Right? And he is imitating it. Usually, mimetic triangles are not a subject and a model, you know, and a model and an imitator. It's a back and forth. You're both model and imitator for each other. You're not just one, right? And this is an excellent illustration of it, right? Are you tracking what's that? Because as the bishop's feelings are growing, Dudley is watching it and he's being affected by it. So what starts out as a ploy becomes so-called real. And Dudley forgets for a minute that the origin of his feelings for Julia are the bishop's feelings, that he's imitating the bishop's feelings. Even as the ploy, he was imitating the bishop's feelings. And as his feelings grew, they were just an imitation of the bishop. And because he's an angel, he's smart enough to know it. He says, I hope I wrote it down.
Yeah, immortals can't fall in love with mortals.
He says, when an immortal finds himself envying a mortal entrusted to his care, it's a danger signal. Okay? And we can say that you don't need immortal or mortals. Envy is a danger signal. It just is. As soon as you feel envy, you can be pretty much sure that the person you think is the obstacle to your desire is also the model for it. They're also inflaming your desire at the same time as they're getting in the way of it. That's what envy is, right? So they have what you want, and they're not going to let you have it. but they're the ones who made you want it in the first place, which you won't admit. But Dudley, angel that he is, can admit it. And that is the thing we all want to imitate, that self-awareness. And what's so wonderful too, I mean, it just strikes the right note. When Dudley leaves, now once the bishops can say, my greatest desire is for Julia, and he's grounded in it, Dudley leaves. But he says that everyone's going to forget that he was there, right? And what was just astounding to me, so everyone's going to forget Dudley's influence in the way that we all are unaware of the influence of the models in our lives. We're completely unaware of it. We act as if all our desires arose spontaneously without being influenced. And then in the most awesome acting out of this, the bishop stands up to deliver his sermon with the sermon written by someone else. He starts to read it. It feels a little strange. Are these my words? And then he just gives it. As if, and he takes it on, as if they're his own words, and delivers the sermon, completely forgetting what he owes the angel. Okay? So, there's a danger in the forgetting, what we owe others. And one of the biggest dangers could be that the bishop began to get a little bit of an inflated head to think, man, I write damn good sermons. I'm really good. You know? And forget that perhaps some of his greatest gifts come from inspiration outside of himself. So there's the risk of egotism and pride and self-importance, not to mention rivalry with others, when we forget what we owe one another.